The following readings are from the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. Each week we read from both scriptures as prescribed by Yogananda ji and by his Guru Sri Yukteswar ji, who was guided by Babaji to compare the two scriptures and to show the same underlying truths between them. This week's reading's title is How Should We Meet Our Tests? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Last week we considered Satan's temptation of Jesus in the wilderness after his baptism by John. We discussed the question, does Satan exist? All of us experience temptation of one kind or another in our lives. Some of us frequently, others only occasionally. Whether temptation comes to us from our own subconscious or from outside ourselves is secondary to the fact that it does come and that we must deal with it. More important then is the question how to deal with it. In fact, how to deal with tests of any kind. Martin Luther flung an ink pot at the devil who had appeared to test him. A dark stain on the wall of Luther's cell pointed out to tourists in support of this story. Unfortunately, our trials are not often so summarily dismissed. As a fellow monk once said to Swami Kriyananda, speaking of Satan, if I could only get my hands on him. Jesus, during his temptation in the wilderness, overcame them and thereby set an example for all time by clinging all the more determinedly to God. As Paramahansa Yogananda used to say, darkness cannot be driven out of a room with a stick. Once you turn on the light, however, the darkness will vanish as though it had never been. Jesus manifested this principle. The Bible tells us, therefore, that at last the devil leaveth him, and behold, angels came and ministered unto him. In the Bhagavad Gita, the point is clarified further by an added explanation that there are three qualities in human nature: sattvic or spiritually elevating, rajasic or ego activating, and tamasic or spiritually darkening. It is this triune aspect of human nature that the third chapter refers to with the words, as fire is hidden by smoke, as a mirror is dulled by rust, and as an embryo is enclosed in the womb, so is the indwelling self enveloped by desire. Yogananda explained that each of these examples describe one of the qualities or gunas. Sattva guna, which elevates our consciousness, can be freed from any identity with ego by a little puff of meditation and right affirmation. Rajoguna, which embroils the ego in restless activity, can be worked off with a little more and a little longer effort. Tamoguna, embracing as it does such mental states as laziness and stupidity, can only be outgrown in time, since it inhibits even the desire for self-improvement. The example Jesus gave us was intended more for those in whom sattva guna is predominant. But if you yourself find elements in your consciousness that resist even the effort to cling to God in prayer and meditation, don't despair. Patience, as it has been well said, is the fastest path to God. As long as your efforts take you steadfastly in the right direction, you will come out right in time. Remember Yogananda's words, a saint is a sinner who never gave up. If, however, your nature impels you, even against your will, to move in the wrong direction towards egoic desires and away from God, strive at least to detach yourself mentally from your wrong actions, which are induced by habit. The time will come when their own stored up energy will tire and diminish. At that time, if you have not contributed to that energy by your consenting will, you will find it possible at last to redirect your energies more constructively. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om. Om.
This reading is from Whispers from Eternity by Paramhansa Yogananda, and a book of prayer poems, and is entitled, Be Thou the General in My Invasion of Ignorance. I bled, spreading thy name, and for thy name's sake I will ever bleed. With bloody limbs, broken body, wounded features, and bearing the thorn crown of derision, yet like a mighty warrior will I fight undismayed, even there where the skirmish is thickest. With the sword of calmness I will stand firm against the hands of persecution. My disciplined armies of true aspiration, blowing trumpets in thy name, now march in triumph to seize the dark kingdom of God-denying souls. No matter how many blows I receive, and no matter how often the swords of persecution pierce my heart, I am content in the realization that thou knowest my craving to spread thy name. I will wear my tribulations not as scars, but as medals given for courage, and as aspirations to strive ever harder in my fight against ignorance. O Lord, help me conquer darkness with thy golden message of light. Be thou ever the general in my invasion of the continent of ignorance. Well, hopefully that was an invigorating start to this morning. It's so important what Swamiji has written in How Shall We Meet Our Tests, because we may feel that we go through tests and make it all the way through the 12th standard exams and then get through college, and then the only test we have to worry about after that is like a driver's test or an eye test or something, and that otherwise we're all set. Unless you're a part of a profession where you have to get certified or recertified intermittently, or you go for some new kind of certification to develop professionally. Otherwise, there aren't many tests. And it's just not true at all. I can't help, of course, one of my favorite stories, seeing Bindu and Babu here. As you may know, in Level 3, Part 1, in order to complete the course, you need to read the whole book. And the night before the ceremony, which is not unique to them by any means, they were reading the book frantically, trying to finish it, or perhaps reading it calmly. And their children saw them studying and said, "Very good." You can imagine the satisfaction that their young children had at saying, "Amma and Appa have to suffer finally." And then the next morning they said, "Good luck with your exam." Did I tell that correctly? Yeah, well, okay. So, but our tests continue and continue, especially once we get on the spiritual path. But even before, it's sometimes our tests that drive us onto the spiritual path. And again, that can come at any age. And it doesn't really much matter what age we come onto the path. It's the right time. Some people come onto the path and say, "Oh my God, how many years of my life have I wasted?" And it's just not true. It's those years prepared us to come onto the path. First of all, on the one hand, we have I know someone very young who came on the path at 20 and said, "Oh, how many years have I wasted?" And meanwhile the 50-year-olds are saying, "Ha ha ha." But it's not that way at all. If we ever have that thought, if only I had known that I would have done things differently, God may have said, better not that you know, because you have some karma to work out to prepare you, some things to, and it's not a punishment and it's not being held back. And we can always take comfort that Lahiri Mahashai came onto the path at 33. He was married, he had a family, so that's something. Sri Yukteswar, well, actually, I don't know when he came on the path. But still, he was an adult at least, and married, and I might have had a daughter by then. But of course, that's the one argument. On the other hand, as someone will always point out, with Lahiri Mahashai as the householder yogi, he said yes, but he spent all of his days in samadhi, and so that's not exactly the householder path that I'm experiencing right now. And so, fair enough. But still, the example stands. The other thing is that, on the other hand, though, we have a disciple of Master who came to him, and she had been an atheist her whole life, and she was in her 80s when she came to Master. And then when she came to him, she just was, you could say, converted or opened in a second, and she just was totally devoted to him. She would play records of his recordings of his voice. She would always have orange flowers around her to remind her of his orange robe. And when she died, Master said she was liberated. So just in a few years, 80 years without the path and just a few years after. I wouldn't try that experiment consciously. But the point is, it's not only is it never too late, it was right. I mean, if she was liberated, it was definitely right. I mean, that's success. She graduated. We can always say it's the right time, and you can say, yeah, it's a nice thing to think. But it was for her. And so we should trust in that. But also, for many of us, we look back at our life before the path, and we see that there was suffering. And sometimes we wonder about that suffering. Why did I have to suffer? Or was it because of my bad karma that I suffered? And first of all, on one level, yes, it's always true that we suffer because of bad karma, but it doesn't mean it's a punishment or in any way diminishing us. What's the alternative? I'm suffering because of my good karma. It makes me so unhappy. Unlikely. Because honestly, if it really brings you a lot of real peace and real joy, it is good karma. And so we have to now understand, what does it even mean, good karma and bad karma? If our bad karma causes us to question life, causes us to wonder, isn't there anything better? Causes us to say, this love that I've been seeking in people and not finding, maybe the love is elsewhere. Whatever it is that drives us onto the spiritual path, which of course you all are, can we call that bad karma if the outcome was good? Do you see? It was beneficial karma, at least you can say, because of the outcome. And furthermore, really what makes karma good, or anything good, as it says in this reading, it's wonderful. There's so much in this reading that, Swamiji just inserts. He says, if, however, your nature impels you, even against your will, to move in the wrong direction, wrong, what makes something wrong or bad? He says, toward egoic desires and away from God. Anything that takes us away from God is wrong or bad in the sense that it is unhelpful. That's a much better word, because so much of these other words are weighted down with judgment. Judgment from other people, judgment from ourselves, judgment from God, never. If God was really judging us, think about the experiment that he created. He makes this beautiful path with flowers on either side, digs a huge pit, and then covers it all up with flowers and leaves and everything, and a big sign that says, walk here, it'll be fine. And then we fall into the pit, and then he says, idiot. He set the whole thing up. Master even pointed this out. He said, you never had to struggle with delusion. You never had to experience suffering. Why do you experiment on us? It's a good question. But he said, even though he's frustrated with the experiment, he said, but God's answer is, I'm bringing them all back to me. And Master said in one of these talk tapes, what are you going to say? It's true, he is bringing us back. He did say it another time, God is very sorry for what he's done. And we should press that. You're sorry, aren't you? So show it. Help me out here. I'm struggling. So, it reminds me of the story of Narada went to do an audit of all the devotees, internal audit, to just see how all the devotees of God were doing. And so he went on his tour and checked everybody out. I think he started in Tamil Nadu and then went over to Karnataka. And anyway, he all these practices. And he said, when he met Narada, and he said, hello, as if welcome to my august presence. And Narada said, well, I'm sort of, doing this audit for God. And he said, well, tell God I've given him 80 years and it's high time he comes. And so Narada said, definitely. And then so he was on his way to the beam out point, or wherever it was, where he was going to teleport back to God, because almost just as an accident, he came across, there was this man, this young man who was drunk, and he was trying to build a fence, but he was so drunk he couldn't even put the first post. He had managed to dig a hole somehow, or maybe he found the hole, and then but he couldn't even get the post into the hole, which is to say, it's fairly straightforward. I mean, you just kind of lean it, and the post is supposedly heavy enough, it just falls in, and he just couldn't do it, and he was cursing God. This is terrible. Why don't you help me? This is, so hard. And Narada, almost just out of a whim, just sort of came up to him and said, what are you trying to do? Maybe he didn't realize, I'm building a fence. And he just said, oh my gosh. He said, what do you do? He said, oh, I'm counting God's devotees. And he said, you tell him I'm trying to work down here and he's got to help me. And Narada just said, sure. And then he went up to God. And so then, as he was going through his list, probably starting at A and working down to Z of everybody and how they were doing, he got to this. He said, there's one person, though, who deserves special mention, this old ascetic who was so focused on you and doing all these things. And as Swamiji puts it in telling the story, God searched his omniscience, his all-knowing mind, and said, Yare, I'm sorry, I don't know him. And Narada was surprised. I mean, here it was. First of all, God's all-knowing. He has to know it, actually. But anyway, so he then said, well, that's it. And he said, wasn't there anybody else that you met? And he said, well, right, I met this young man. And God said, the one who was putting the post in the hole, right? And he said, Lord, what is this? This one guy you don't know at all. Just about to come as soon as I finish passing elephants through the eye of a needle. And so Narada said, okay. And I don't know if he was checking for elephants and is it what kind of needle. But anyway, he went down and he first came to the ascetic and said, I've got good news for you. God is coming. He's just passing elephants through the eye of a needle. And he said, what? I've never heard such a ridiculous thing in my life. Elephants through the eye of a needle, indeed. Goodbye, God, and all your crazy crowd. I have wasted my whole life on this. I'm going to run back to the city and enjoy myself for a little bit in what time I have left. And so Narada was surprised. And then he went to this drunk man and said that God is going to come to you. It's just that he's busy passing elephants through the eye of a needle. And the man said, but that means he's going to come right away. God can do anything. He can do the impossible in a second. He must already be here. Come dance with me, my friend. God is here. And Narada saw this devotion that he hadn't noticed through the fumes earlier. And suddenly in their midst there was the Lord. And so that story, of course, has many important points, but the one that I wanted to share, and how should we meet our tests, like the test of no current, is that we are, who is this guy who's drunk, thank you, God, who's drunk trying to put a post in a hole? I mean, first of all, that's not the moral of the story. If you want to find God, first go to the bar or the Tasmac, then get some wood. And no, it's not that. But you see, that drunk guy loved God, and when tested, he showed that love for God. The other guy was full of pride of his pure practices, and I bathe 21 times a day, and I only, all of that. He was doing it from the outside in, because when tested, he said, forget it. There was no love there. If he said God's about to come, and as the point of another story, someone was so thrilled that God would come at all. And but this other guy, trying to make a fence and doing a bad job of it, but he had love. And so in a certain way we can think of ourselves that way. That sometimes we make a mess of things. Sometimes we don't do behavior perfectly. We should be sincere. But even sincerely, we can be completely dumb, as we discover later on. And you don't have to be perfect in that way for God to love you. You see? You can just say, I'm still trying to get that post into a hole. You know, obviously do your best. Learn from your mistakes. God is teaching us. But we can get this wrong thought that somehow we have to have it all together. I mean, how many 5-year-olds do you see where they go and they have their business suit and they have their phone and they have their Excel spreadsheet? You know, no, they don't have it all together yet, if that means having it together. And so are we. We should be like children with God, and trusting and open and loving and counting on Him. You see, Swamiji talks about how shall we meet our tests, that's the title, and then he talks a lot about temptation. He adds, how shall we handle temptation or tests of any kind in the reading. And of course, temptation really is a desire that comes from within us for something that's unhelpful to us. And he gives a good example for that. First of all, try your best to divert your attention when you feel drawn to something that you would rather not do. Another thing is that even if you find yourself doing it against your will, losing your cool and yelling at someone when you're really wanting not to, then and later try to distance yourself mentally from it. Not to say, it didn't happen. There is that story of the mental approach to God where people who think that whatever they believe is true. And so there's this story of, how shall we put it? Let's just say a Hindu and a Christian and one of these others. I don't want to name them because I don't want to insult them so publicly. But just say a mentalist. And so they find themselves after death all in hell. And so the Hindu says, what am I doing here? You know, maybe I accidentally, maybe I'll say a Jain so it's easier. I accidentally killed too many things, and I was supposed to be nonviolent. And the Christian said, maybe I didn't go to my, my mass or my services. And they turned to the mental person and said, well, why are you here? And he said, I'm not. We can't dismiss our test just with the thought, I'm a yogi, therefore I never do anything wrong. No, it's not truthful. And there's no point in that. Then we have nothing to learn, no way to grow, no way to be even more. So we really want to be open to God's help and to ask for God's help. So as I said, a temptation that comes, another way is to say, even if we do it, to say, I don't want to do it. I didn't want to do it. Lord, help me. I don't want to do this anymore. That's a way of withdrawing energy from it. Because remember, it's a desire. So saying, for example, I have the opposite desire, or the desire to do the opposite is helpful. It's also helpful to do the opposite. So for example, suppose we have a temptation to want to take from other people. I'm sorry, I need this. And so I must take it. It's just really sad because we feel like, well, isn't God going to help us? Why do we have to take it from someone else? If that's a desire, even to covet, to desire what other people have, to then say, well, then instead, have their moment. And so in many ways, try to find a way to give. If we have created a lot of disharmony, then consciously try to create harmony. Maybe it can't be with the same people because when they see you coming, they sort of back away. You say, no, I'm here to create harmony! So it might be anyone, some stranger you might find a way to be kind to. In other words, we often do things we don't want out of reaction, and we've lost self-control, and that's not the time to then but I mean it in a good way. It's too late. The cat's out of the bag, the toothpaste is out of the tube, it's done. So, on the other hand, knowing that and feeling that sadness, then what can we do consciously? You say, I choose in this situation to be kind. I choose in this situation to give harmony. And it's fair to be said also to apologize. You lose nothing and you gain everything by apologizing and saying, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. And not to say, okay, now it's your turn. Let them work it out or not. God will be pleased with you. You have to use common sense. If the person is just going to use it against you and you apologize and they try to diminish you, you just say, no, that's because what I did was wrong. Independent of however I was provoked, still, I do not want to react that way. I should not have. But don't do anything. Where did it say? When Prasanna was reading, did you hear the part where Swamiji said, and it's very useful always to feel guilty? Nowhere. It's not in the whole book. Don't feel guilty. There is just no point. In fact, once when Swamiji was in a meeting talking with people at the community and somebody said, Swamiji, there's just a lot of people say that they're struggling with their meditations. I don't know if it was a lot, but, this person said something like that. And they're feeling guilty. He said, if there is one word I would like to eliminate from our vocabulary, it would be guilt. Guilty. Don't feel guilty. It doesn't, again, it's fine to apologize and make amends. I don't mean to deny what happened, but guilt just adds to the problem. It doubles the problem. We've already done something wrong, and we feel that pinch on our heart saying, I did wrong. But no reason to add guilt on top of it. Again, we're all in this together. We're all growing. We're all in the same school. So as I said, Swamiji mentions temptations in the context with the title, How Should We Meet Our Tests? But really, I was thinking, in some way, every test is a temptation. Obviously, there's the temptations that I've just been talking about. But when we, for example, are in a very difficult situation, it's very scary, and we could say, well, I don't see how there's a temptation there, except a temptation to get out of it. But there's a temptation to become so afraid that we forget to ask God for help. There's a temptation to think, I am the only one who can fix this, and the one who created this planet and this galaxy that the planet is in, well, there's nothing God can do. This is too big of a problem. This has to do with taxes and so on. Trivial things. So this thought of, God, help me. God, I'm going to ask for your help. I'm going to trust in you to help me. And also guide me, not just help me by removing it. As Sister Gyanamata prayed, she said she saw a test coming that she was hoping she could avoid. And then she saw there was no way to avoid it. And then she said, Divine Mother, change not my circumstance, change me. And so it's a wonderful prayer for us. Help me to meet this. And if you get an idea or something, try. I don't just mean just sit there and hope that it goes away. It does remind me, though, of a funny story of there was these two children who were assigned to write an essay, and I'm just going to shortcut the story. One of the children was a yogi child. And so while the essay was on the elephant and the nature of the elephant. And so while the other one was at the library and studying and reading, the yogi child prayed to become one with the elephant. And then he could write the essay from that. But it reminds me, though, of, so you can try that. Meditate, see if God says, actually canceled, you don't have to worry. But if it doesn't work, then also put out effort. But always keep praying. And it reminds me of another story of masters, which relates to our alert attention. That one disciple was trying to meditate and grow, and the guru, as part of the way to help him, got him a buffalo, a pet buffalo. And the boy loved the buffalo, and he would spend time with it, and he would sleep on the buffalo and all this. And as my father said, he had a cow that when he was growing up in Trivandrum, or actually Kottayam, and you would call to the cow and it would answer back. And so, he had this nice relationship with the buffalo. And then the guru said, now you should go though, and now you should go to your room and meditate. And you should be in seclusion and focus. And he said, but who will feed the buffalo? I will feed the buffalo. And so then the guru checked in on him a little bit later, and he said, how are you? He said, I just can't stop thinking and worrying about my buffalo. And so the master said, then you just go ahead. You think about the buffalo. So, and that's a useful teaching right there. If we're trying to meditate and there's something that's really on our mind, then ask God about that. Say, look, I'm trying to do my Hong Sa, I'm trying to do my Om technique, I'm trying to do my Kriya, but this thought, which is usually a worry, but maybe it's a desire, maybe, because if it's low energy, they kind of change a lot. But if it's one thought, it's on your mind. So say to God, I'm worried about this person, can you bless them? I'm worried about this situation that's coming up. Can you promise that you will be there with me when it comes, or whatever? And then also feel that you've handed it off to him. And now it's his turn to take care of it so you can meditate. Anyway, so the boy was focused. The master came in the next day and said, how are you doing? He said, I am feeding my buffalo, and I am caressing him. And then the next day, because he was having a period of seclusion, and so then the next day the master said, how are you doing? And he said, I am dancing with the buffalo, and then afterwards we are going to have a nap together. And then he said, that's fine, go ahead. And then the third day, the master said to him, what are you doing with the buffalo now? And you've got to hear master tell this, but he says, what do you mean? I am the buffalo. And he says, don't come near me, I will hit you with my horns. And the master said, okay, son, it's fine, why don't you come now? We're not sure exactly why, but he was obviously done with something. No, and he said, I can't get through the door, my horns will stick. And he said, you can come. And then the boy came out, and then the master said to him, now concentrate on Brahma. And the boy did, and merged with God. And so we should also help understand that anytime we concentrate with alert, awake attention, we're developing our buffalo skill. We're developing our concentration, and that concentration will help us to concentrate more on God. And for example, Swamiji said that he found when he was growing up, his family was into big business and corporations, and he was so tired of that kind of culture, partly because, it was very much against not only his own personality, but against finer things, higher thoughts, just let's be practical, always bringing something down to, either earth or dollars and cents and nothing higher. And so he tells one story of driving in a car full of with his father and a few other businessmen, and they were all smoking. Back in the day, imagine what we all lived through. And he was gasping. They were driving through somewhere in the winter, gasping for air. And he rolled the window down in order to get a little bit of air. And one of the men said, "Put the window up, son. You'll catch cold." A cold would be preferable. Maybe you couldn't breathe then with all this stuff in. So anyway, he just had this aversion to business, and then he found that Master's two most advanced male disciples were businessmen, and so he had to rethink he said, what's going on? But he realized that they had developed such powers of concentration. In fact, many of Master's disciples were businessmen, that from concentrating on business, they just went to concentrate on God, and they could grow very fast. So we should always develop our concentration, meaning when we're doing something, try not to just check out mentally, or when you're not doing something to check out mentally, because that habit, unfortunately, pulls away from our concentration. Don't worry about it, but just do it. Just focus on whatever you're doing, get it done, and then think of God or call to God. You can do japa, you can do other things, thinking of God if it's a mindless task, sure. Whenever I'm cooking or cleaning things, I'll listen to Swamiji's voice, and that helps, me really put my mind on that. And then I turn and, oh, look, everything is clean. I didn't even notice. I was just lost in what he was saying. But sometimes you really do have to put your mind on something to get it done, in which case do. And you'll find even there's a satisfaction, a peace, a clarity. Concentration brings clarity, and it's a divine quality, and we feel uplifted by that clarity. So again, let us remember when facing our tests to not give in to the temptation to become afraid, the temptation to think that God is not watching, the temptation to think that God can't help. I did pray that way once. I was so frustrated with a situation, and I said to God, I know that there is nothing that can be done, but still, it would be nice. Because I couldn't imagine any better outcome. And the next day, everything changed. One of the problems involved, we were moving from one community to another. And I always sort of forget how much money it costs to move. You think of, well, no, you've got to spend money in the new place and you've got to settle your old place. But just what about the truck? What about this? What about all these oh my gosh. Anyway, so we were coming up short. But I knew before I changed my address, I had to make the last payment on the insurance that for something that I was paying off. And when I called, they said, don't send the payment. I said, look, I'd rather send it now, while I know I have the money and everything. And they said, no, don't send it at all. There was a miscalculation, and we have overcharged you. And so not only you shouldn't send this payment, but we have to send you money back. Now, if that's not proof of God's existence, I don't know what is. For the insurance company to be paying you. And especially because they could have just not said anything and I would have never known. Or they could have said, don't send the last one, it's on us. Meanwhile, they had the rest of whatever I had sent. But the woman was completely honest, and it was very touching. And then there was something else that we were planning to buy, and instead someone gave it to us as a gift. And they said, we want this to be a send-off to help you in this next chapter. It was very sweet. That was God's answer to me saying, nothing can be done, but it would be nice. In another situation, I prayed, and I remembered this thought that everything that happens is actually for your good. You'll see in time that it will be to your benefit. And something, I don't want to go into the whole story, but it's a fun one, but that happened, and I was just I had said, make sure this doesn't happen, and it happened. And then I said, Divine Mother, I dare you to show me how this is any good at all. And anyway, it turned out to be extremely good in the end. So work with God and work with yourself when you're feeling depressed or you're having a hard test. Sometimes it's not remembering God, meaning it should be, that's our goal, but we first have to lighten up. We first have to open ourselves. One way is humor. And as I said to some friends not long ago during a time of testing, well, if nothing else, say to yourself, could be worse. Imagine how it could be worse, or remember when it was worse. And then say, oh, okay, I can live with this. I was talking to Prasanna the other day about a difficult situation. I was saying, yeah, this is difficult. He said, I don't know, maybe I think my standards are so low that I just don't think that it's that difficult. I said, what do you mean? It is really difficult. And then he reminded me of a situation that was way worse. And I said, you are right. I will take this every day and twice on Sunday rather than that. So again, just finding a way to relax, to open up. He's laughing because he knows exactly what I'm talking about. So Master said, actually quoting Sri Yukteswar, that, which I unfortunately don't have the quote perfectly, but our tests should be met calmly, and we should greet our trials pleasantly. So first thing is calm. Try to be calm as best you can. And usually we're not calm, because if we are calm, it's not a test. Okay? I mean, just sort of, quick, 1 + 1. Oh, let me see. Gosh. That's not a test. Something is only a test if we get rattled. That's what makes it a test. And that's also why people's tests are different. Because you may go through something that is not hard for you, but someone else would say, oh my God, how could you do it? And maybe because of how you've grown and whatever, you say, no, I trust in God. Then that's not a test, but it would be a test for them. And of course, vice versa. Sometimes it seems unfair that one person is really upset because some trivial thing happened. And meanwhile, you should see what I have to deal with. But remember, you're being tested at the appropriate level of what you need to grow. And again, I don't mean the punishment you need. Sometimes it's just the endurance. Sometimes it's the detachment. Sometimes it drives us more to God. All the saints have been tested heavily. You never sort of hear of some saint that just had no problems and then suddenly won with God, and that was fun, thanks. Plus I, got a big pile of gold too. And so we should first get calm. Meditation helps, prayer helps, chanting helps, do all of those things to get calm first. And if you can't get calm, try to understand why. I can't get calm because I'm too afraid something bad there's going to be a bad outcome. Swamiji said if you can't get that thought out of your mind, sometimes it's helpful to visualize the bad outcome. Rather than, no, it can't, say, fine, what if it did? And see yourself going through it and coming out the other side. In other words, if you've been through something really difficult, you've learned that you can go through something really difficult and live to tell the tale. That's one of the great things that hard tests bring us, especially if they happen when we're young. We've realized that, I survived it. And I may be a little bloodied and bruised, as Master said in this Whispers from Eternity poem, but he also said in another, I am bloodied but unbowed. And so we also should just feel that, look, I've made it. I've lived to tell the tale, and so I will live through this too. And often the worst fear does not come. So to be calm. The other is to meet the tests pleasantly. Now that can be a little harder, but you can find ways to make something pleasant out of it. For one thing, anything that you go through that's difficult is probably just burning karma. And so at least you can say, well, some karma will be gone and I will be lighter after this, which is an experience you may have had when you've gone through a heavy test that had no happy ending, but at the end you somehow feel lighter for it. You feel a sense of a burden has been taken off of you. Another way to meet it pleasantly is to just say, well, I'm glad I know Divine Mother is paying attention to me because she's poking me with all these different tests. Sometimes we can think I don't even know if I'm growing spiritually. I'm just having the same old day after day, and so on. When you go through the test, you say, I know I'm growing. So we can comfort ourselves that way. But the most important way to work with tests, Swamiji said, is to be calm, but be as positive as you can. Push the thought out of your mind. It's not going to work. You're going to fail. All of those attacks, think of those as external, even if they're internal. And say, shut up. I'm not listening to any of that. But also, he said, put out as much energy as you can in the opposite direction, as much positive energy as you can. In other words, try to solve the test. One simple test Master had, he was late for a lecture, and so he was running. And somebody saw him and said, don't be nervous. And he said, one can run nervous or one can run calmly. But to not run when you need to is to be lazy. So it doesn't mean that Swamiji realized he was late for a flight and didn't say, oh, well, I pray that the plane come by my house and pick me up directly. Or he didn't say, oh, it is God's will. He jumped into the car, brought 3 of his friends with them, and said, "You look out this side for cops, you look out this side for cops, you look out the back window." And he drove as fast as he possibly could. And he said one interesting aspect about that is they were in a city, and all the traffic lights that they hit on the way to the airport, everyone was green. And he ran and just made it into the plane, and they closed the door, and that was it. So again, put out energy. If you've got some health problem, read about it. Don't just, yes, in this karma, in this life it was writ that your karma shall be to sneeze all the time. Look it up. You find something about it. Put some energy out. And also with God's help. God, I'm open, help me. But again, He helps us when we put energy out. And also, though, when we're dealing with bad habits, which was addressed here, put, again, the energy in the positive direction and as the opposite, but also positive energy in general. Swamiji said that even when he was working with his own habits, things he wanted to overcome, even one of his habits he was so frustrated with, and Master said, "Don't be upset. This tendency is not strong in you. Don't get too worked up." Anyway, he said he had, kind of looking at it as a balance scale. We've got these bad things on one side and good things on the other. And remember, you have plenty of good things. Obviously, to love God, to be interested in improving yourself, to try to be more patient, you have plenty of good things in your favor. But Swamiji said, I just kept trying to heap as many more things as I could on the good side. In other words, sometimes you have to say, I can't help the other side. It's still happening. I don't want it. I'm still doing it, or whatever. And so then to just do as much good as you can, and hope that it will tip the scales in your favor. Of course, they're already tipped in your favor, but maybe they'll tip enough to knock one of these things off. And he said, in fact, he saw in time that that did happen, that those things that he was trying to let go of, they did leave him, and so on. So that may be a positive thing that's, like I said, related to the habit. It may just be anything positive. Even it may have nothing to do with other people. In other words, be kind to other people. That's great, seriously. But also to be just kind to ourselves, to be more patient, to remember God quicker in a crisis. That's a good thing. In other words, the more we can think of God, the more we can think of Master, the more we can act asking Master to flow through us, work in partnership with Him. You see, in that sense, we aren't children that just, Appa, you fix it. Or, I will fix it all by myself. That's being too adult. You don't want to be too childish or too grown up either. You see, just say, Appa, let's do this together. Guruji, let's do this together. Okay? God bless you.